Sorry, I just.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Writer's Room. I am your co-host, Kat Rocha, the night editor, and with me is
J.Ishiro Finney, author and alien in a human suit, and author of the great book Scars, which you should go buy right now on Amazon.
Yes.
There.
But tonight, our special guest is Jagi Lamplighter. Did I pronounce your Jagi
No,
correct?
it's actually Jagi.
It's Jagi. Okay, I was
Yeah,
going to ask before if I was
like in
pronouncing it
magic,
wrong. Okay, Jagi, I apologize.
No
So
problem. I
Jagi
never
Lamplighter.
expect anyone to figure it out by looking at it. I should have told you.
So, Jagi, is that. Explain the name.
Okay, so I made it up when I was a kid, but then I started using it, and I used it so much that I had it legally changed so I could put it on my documents.
That's pretty awesome.
So my
like
first
that.
name is Lane, like a road, because my dad was a Buddhist, and he wanted to call us Do and Dharma. So he called us Lane and Law. And my middle name was Jenny, and I changed it to Jagi. And only in the last year or two have I found out that of my 4 great-grandmothers, 3 were named Jenny. I think I would have been a little slower to change it if I had known, but here I am.
So, anyway, we've been talking about this interview for quite a bit.
Yes.
Bit of a change of pace for us. We've had a lot of people on that were primarily space opera and I guess occult crime.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a real shift of gears.
Yeah.
I mean, the only fantasy writer has been David, and his work's definitely more Howard influenced. Yours is well, what are the two? You've got 2 very popular series right now. One is the Prospero Lost series, and the other is more a YA series called Rachel Griffin.
It's called the Books of Unexpected Enlightenment is the actual name. Everybody calls it by the character's name, but it's really Unexpected Enlightenment.
I like that title.
My writing was once described by a reader as, now let's see if I can remember this because I thought it was really good. It was C.S. Lewis meets Neil Gaiman, or for an American equivalent, Roger Zelazny meets Lloyd Alexander. And I thought that was a really good description of particularly the Prospero books. Like, if you can imagine those 4 authors. And then the Rachel Griffin books have been described as Fringe or Supernatural meets Narnia at Hogwarts, which I also really like that description because it's at Hogwarts. It's not Harry Potter, in that it's a background that has a lot in common with the idea of, it's a Harry Potter like a magic school you enjoy being at. I say that because there's lots and lots and lots of magic school books out there, but a lot of them, the school's kind of gothic and scary. So mine has in common with Harry Potter that the magic school is kind of a place you'd like to go. But the storyline really goes off in its own direction. So that's why I particularly like those 2 descriptions. I think they fit the writing pretty well.
Okay, so I guess since we're starting with the Unexpected Enlightenment series, give the short pitch.
Okay. Well, you know how in Harry Potter there's the Muggles and then there's the wizards. In the Unexpected Enlightenment books, Rachel Griffin is already of the world of the wise. She's like one of the wizards. And she goes off to magic school and she begins to discover that there's another world that's as hidden from the wizards as the magic sorcery world is from the unwary. They're the wise and the unwary. So, and the world that is hidden includes things like statues of women with wings and in her world, there's no Bible, there's no God, there's no Jews, there's no Muslims, there's no Christians, there's no angels and demons. But all those things exist. Somebody has deliberately hid them. So as she goes along through her going to school adventures and her fighting demon adventures and her magical adventures, there's this undercurrent of trying to find out why the world was changed and who was responsible and what they've lost. And at the end of book 4, she's told that the one thing that was taken away from the world was more important than everything that was left in. So that's kind of that kind of book. It's part humor, part action, part romance, and has this undercurrent of mystery. There was a term we used to use, metaphysical intrigue was a term that John and I used to use for this kind of story. So it's kind of a metaphysical intrigue story with a kind of teen going to school adventure on top of it.
So with so many of these magic school genre books out right now, and I guess it's been kind of a staple for what, over 2 decades now?
Yeah.
How does Rachel differ from the typical Harry Potter-esque protagonist that we usually get?
Well, one major difference between Rachel and most of the genre is that she is not an outsider. She is an outsider from the weird things that were hidden even from her. But most of these stories are about, poor outsiders from the normal world who get sucked into magic. Rachel is the daughter of a duke from the world of the wise. So she's a rich girl from the magical world. And therefore, her whole experience is a little bit different. She takes the whole thing on in a very different way. And I'm trying to think of, there's quite a few differences. So I've read quite a few of the other, magic books, and there's quite a few differences, but it's hard for me to put into words quickly. It's got a lot more humor than many of them. Some of them are funny, but a lot of magic school books, as I mentioned, are a bit on the gothic side. Mm-hmm. They don't have much humor at all. And this series has a number of characters such as Siegfried Smith, the young crazy orphan. He's a young man who had never heard about magic until just recently when the books start. And he's going through what they call magic shock, which means he doesn't know it's real anymore because everything he was told was real up to that point turned out not to be real. So he's kind of crazy, but he's a favorite character of most readers. So, characters like that bring a lot of color and drama. And that's, by the way, Siegfried is John's character. So this was a role-playing game.
Oh, really?
Oh, okay.
Yes, it was. It was run by our friend Mark Whipple, and our friend Bill played the princess, and I played Rachel originally, and John played Siegfried Smith. And so whenever I write Ziggy, I bring the scene to John for what we call ziggification, so he can make it more Siegfried-like. Only occasionally we have something like what happened tonight where I wrote something, I read it to him, he's like, "You've got it. I can't add anything. You've got the character." So that's always a big triumph for me when I actually get Ziggy down to the point that John has nothing he can add.
So then what would ziggification be? Really, what, before and after?
Well, it would be, I might write, Ziggy walks into the room and he picks up a sandwich. And when John's done with it, he's strode into the room. He's lit something on fire. He's put 2 or 3 sandwiches into his pocket. He's thrown them up in the air for his dragon to eat. It's bigger. It's more dramatic. It's always over the top. He's always over the top. So it's that kind of thing, And
what would you say is the defining characteristic of Rachel?
Well, Rachel,
I'm going to be blunt. There's a reason I'm asking this question.
Rachel is a little girl with a perfect memory that lets her see things other people are not remembering. And I think she's 2 characteristics. She's very brave and she's self-sacrificing in the sense that she's just so concerned about accomplishing what she thinks will help that she doesn't really think about herself. And she's a bit arrogant some of the time, but she balances it out by being selfless some of the time. I don't know if that's really. It's probably what I think her bravery is one of her main qualities because that's really what got her into all the trouble she's in now.
Well, okay, now for I'm going to be very blunt why I asked that question. Harry Potter happened, and there was an explosion of these books, and suddenly there was a dime of a dozen female protagonist version of Harry Potter. And that's why I'm asking, how do you differ?
I see. So, well, in the original game, Rachel was, I was hoping to get into, it was originally a Harry Potter game, and I was hoping to get into Ravenclaw, and I failed. The moderator wouldn't let me do that. But I decided that I normally played a somewhat cautious character, and I was going to design this new character I was playing to be a little bit like Sadie Kane in Rick Riordan's Kane books, or like Jade Chan in the Jackie Chan cartoons, which was a girl who ran into danger. She was braver than I was. So that's why I mentioned Rachel's bravery. She's a person who's going forward. She's not waiting for the problems to come to her. And a lot of these times, these characters are a little on the passive side, I guess.
So we're not getting any angst here, is what you're saying.
Well, she has a lot of angst in her life. Not all of it is made into the books yet. But there's a difference between a character who tries to keep her head down and life happens to her, and a character who jumps forward and runs forward as soon as she thinks there's a problem. And Rachel's in the second category. It's funny because John and I were talking about her. The other thing that makes Rachel quite different from a lot of these other characters is she's not modern. Almost all the other ones I've seen are modern girls with modern values. Rachel was raised by two people who were born in the early part of the 18th century. So she's got all these Victorian values. And she's kind of a little bit stiff, and she's modest, and she judges things in a very old-fashioned way. And I think that's quite different from most of the ones that I've read. Most of the ones I've read, as I say, are an outsider, a modern person coming to magic. Rachel is a person who's not like that at all. She's almost like a Victorian girl trying to get through these things.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I do have to ask this one question. This is purely from my own experience. Since there are a lot of magic school books out there, and I think you've done a great job of explaining how yours stands apart from a lot of them out there. But a lot of them that have female protagonists fall into the trap of the female protagonist is a Mary Sue. Now, I know you said that this is based on your game, but how do you avoid that trap of,
well,
this is your character, it's a Mary, you're not a Mary Sue.
Games run on easy, medium, and hard.
Mm-hmm.
John often says that Mark ran this game for me on extra hard and at one part on nightmare. So Rachel had a really, really hard time. It was so hard that I've taken the first 6 months of her life and put it over 2 years, because you can't put that much heart in a book. No one would want to read.
Oh, wow. Man, he really ran you through the ringer then.
It was really tough. Anyway, but Rachel's just not good at a lot of things. I mean, to be a Mary Sue, you have to be basically good at everything, and you have to have everybody like you, and you have to have everything go your way. Rachel's not good at talking to people. Of the time she's talked to people in the book, at least 3 times people have stormed off and never come back or run off crying. She's really good at a few things. She knows she's not. She has friends who are super magicians, and she's not. They're super sorcerers. So she's really good at a few things she practices, and she's very good at using those things, which makes her look very competent part of the time. But a lot of the time she's not. Her friends are outdoing her. She tries and tries. She fails to do a cantrip and has to fly through a window, which was very painful for her, as you can imagine. And so, I try hard to balance out the things that she succeeds at and to make them fun with the things that she fails at and that she's not good at, because she's only good at certain things. It's a little easier when you're starting with a role-playing character, because you have a sheet and you're not good at certain things. But I think that's one way in which she's different from the Mary Sue style girl. Some things are really hard for her, and some things she tries for books and books and she doesn't accomplish, and other things are really easy and she is really good. So it makes it fun for those scenes. But there's plenty of scenes where she's not successful. And I've tried to be careful. I was explained by my editor that Mary Sue's can also be people who suffer a terrible amount, but they don't seem to be affected by them. And that definitely is not Rachel. She's pretty affected by the things that happen to her. So that's not a problem.
Now, since we've got a lot of gamers in the audience, I got to know, what system were you running?
So I made up the system for my 7-year-old when he was 7. I mean, he's 23 now, when he was 7. And I sat down and I said, I want a game where you can play a Harry Potter character where the stats reflect the things you would have in the book. So you spent points on fame, fortune, familiar, family, and friends or contacts. And then you had scholarly abilities, innate magic, perception, and body, I think they were. And all the main characters were made up that way. I don't bother making up character sheets for lesser characters because I write them as I write them. You know, I'm not running them in a game right now. But we've made up most of our games. We run on a basic something like the Chaosium RuneQuest system, where you use percentile dice. And we just, so in fact, Roanoke Academy has a website of its own. If you put in Wix Roanoke Academy, it'll come up. And on the website is the basic rules for the game, if you go to enroll now. So it has lots of funny little background stuff about the school, and it has the rules for playing the game there. So, but it was fun. What happened was I made this game, and my friend borrowed it to put a game together to run for the birthday of his friend, and that game kind of never really got off the ground. So he invited John and I and another friend to play in it, and we fell in love with this game because of what so in the game, Lucy Pevensey was my roommate and Aslan was her familiar. So you can get the impression it's not like your ordinary game. Mm-hmm. And he did it so well that John and I just were like, somebody has to write this up. So that was kind of why I ended up writing it, because I had a lot of other projects I was going to work on. And we were just so delighted and so charmed and so horrified by this terribly hard but really fun game that I decided it should be a book. So that's kind of weird.
And it all started there, huh?
Yeah. So the other thing that's different about Rachel is that she's slowly finding out about the existence of angels and God and talking lions who may or may not be biblical figures and other things like that. And I went through a long period where I tried to decide if I should change the shape of the lion. And finally I decided, if I make him a bear, people are just going to say that's Aslan in the shape of a bear. And if I make him a deer, they're just going to say that's Aslan in the shape of a deer. So I actually have a chapter in book 4 where he says that. He actually says that if he came in a shape other than the Lion of Judah, people would just say that's the Lion of Judah in the shape of a bear. And he mentions his servant Jack in the books that Jack wrote about him.
And you had another question, right?
I did, although I have a feeling that you've already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Again, on the same lines, the wizarding school genre is available to many people, but we are unfortunately in a day and age where if you have a female protagonist, your books are more than likely aimed at one demographic of readers. Would you consider your books open and available to both boys and girls?
Oh, definitely. I would say more than half of my readers are probably guys, grown men.
Excellent.
I would love to have teen readers, but as an indie writer, I don't have that much access to reaching teens. I haven't figured out how to market to them. So most of my readers are adults, so I do have some teens, and at least half of my readers are male, because this was a game run by guys, 4 guys, and then I was there. So there's action and there's fighting and there's, you know, I'm sure it's parts of it are too girly for the guys. I get, you know, comments sometimes that they kind of cringe at her worrying about, you know, her boyfriend or something. But there's also the other part, and I try to get a good enough mix that the men make it through. Yep, that's it. So,
excellent.
Yeah, I actually think of the series. I mean, it's kind of presented as YA, but I don't think it would actually be good for younger teens. It's really a series for older teens and adults. There's no real way to market that right now, so it's marketed as it's marketed. But
well, just to kind of be brutal right now, doesn't YA essentially mean middle-aged woman?
It probably does. It probably does. So, yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
In connection with the Unexpected Enlightenment series, you've got your Fantastic Schools anthology. What's that exactly? Okay, so there is a Scottish writer named Christopher Nuttall, I think. I don't really know how he pronounces his last name, but Nuttall. He writes this 2 Magic School series. One's called Schooled in Magic, and the other is the Zero Enigma background. And he and I are friends, and he you know, wants to put my books up on his blog, and it did really well, so I was really grateful to him. And we read each other's books, and he's put Rachel Griffin in an alternate version appears in one of the Zero books at a dance. He even has a house lamplighter, which I thought was really sweet of him. Anyway, he came up with this idea of doing these anthologies, and he's got a pretty big following. So what they are is anthologies of stories about with magic schools. And we have a website called Fantastic Schools and Where to Find Them that was really active for about a year. And now we don't keep it up that much, but it has on it a list of every magic school book we're familiar with. And if people know some that are not on there, they can let me know. I add them. So Chris wanted to do an anthology, and I somehow agreed to edit it. Actually, it's published officially. It's published by my son, but he doesn't actually do any of the work. He just. It's hard on Amazon to separate money, you know. So my son took over the official publishing position so that we could keep the money of this project separate from other things. But there's 4 books so far. 3 of them are regular Fantastic Schools, volume 1, 2, and 3. The 4th one is Fantastic Middle Schools, which has stories for accessible to younger readers, because some of the Fantastic School stories are either really scary or have adult stuff in them. So they were not. We have a librarian friend who said, you know, if you could give me a young kid, it was her idea. She even did the cover for it. It's a really lovely cover. She is the cartoonist for the Tempest and the Teardrop comics, if you guys, the Churchian comic, if you guys have seen that. It has a new name now, I can't remember. Anyway, so we are now gathering stories for volumes 5 and 6, and one of those 2 volumes is going to be Fantastic School Holidays, which to me, because I'm an American, meant I thought we were thinking like Christmas and Easter, but he's British, he meant vacation. So it's what do the kids at magic school do during their vacation time? You know, for summer vacation, do they have a job? Things like that. So we're gathering stories for that right now. The first one actually did pretty well. We haven't gotten, I think a lot of it was that we just had a couple of, you know, 2 or 3 authors who had followings already with magic schools. The others haven't done quite as well, but they've done a lot better than almost every one but one anthology I've been in. Most of the anthologies I've been in make like $5 a year, you know, and these do a lot better than that. So a lot better than that. So that's been fun. And I haven't had the heart to say I don't really want to do it again. So now we have 2 more coming, but they're fun. Some of the stories are really good. Some of the stories are just solid. Is there an open call or is it an invite only?
It's open call.
Oh, okay, cool.
I have a email address I use for online stuff. Oh, I guess I'm trying to think where we put the information about it. It's probably on the Superversive SF website. If it's not, I'll put it there.
Cool. Victoria says, sorry if this is a dumb question. There's no such thing. What is an anthology?
An anthology means that it's a bunch of stories by different people.
Kind of like a compilation for music, except...
Yeah, because I think a collection, I think means it's one author's stories, and an anthology means it's a bunch of short stories. So these are short stories, and it's funny, one of my friends wrote Roanoke. So Roanoke Academy is the school Rachel goes to, Roanoke Academy for the Sorcerous Arts. There are 2 stories that appear in these anthologies written by a friend of mine that take place with Roanoke students. And then I wrote a story about Rachel and Siegfried. And then I wrote another story for the fantastic middle schools that's about a former circus girl who's in a wheelchair and her adventures at middle school. So,
well, if you guys ever get around to doing a Fantastic Schools or Fantastic Universities Animal House edition, please let me know. I'd love to write a story like that.
Oh, you do your own magical Herbert West.
We could do. I mean, I don't know how long this is going to go, but I might suggest if these keep going, we could do one on the familiars. Just dealing with the animal things.
Oh no! I meant
you're thinking of a college frat thing.
Yeah,
and that one's probably further down the line. But I'll keep you in mind. But we have college stories in these. If you want to write a story about people at Magical Animal House Frat College, go right ahead. Hey, Chris is the guy who makes the decision, so if he likes it, goes.
Okay.
So they're fun. They're a fun series. I recommend them.
Oh, okay. Samuel is asking again.
I might have missed this, but what system did you play the RPG on, and do we get the usual fantasy creatures?
It was a system I made up myself. We've been running games for 30, 40 years. We just kind of run them. We started before, and so that you can see, if you go to the Roanoke Academy site at Wix, the system for making up character is there. It has the basic rules. I
believe you said you base it on percentiles.
Yeah, it's a percentile dice system where the things that you have to roll for are rolled on a percentile system. A lot of it was done just by storytelling, but anything that was like battle related or where there was a real question of whether it would succeed or not was done with a roll, including sometimes whether or not you got romantically ahead was done with a roll. Not always. It depended on the situation. If you're trying something, that was questionable.
Okay, so I guess unless our listeners have any questions about the Fantastic Schools type stuff, let's move on to your other series, Prospero Lost.
So Prospero Lost, that also came from a role-playing game. 2 role-playing games, actually. It was the character of Miranda was a character sketch I wrote up for a Amber game, 9 Princes of Amber game that never really went anywhere. But I liked the character. And the idea for the original character was that she was the daughter of one of these immortals. And as I rewrote it 6 or 7 times, I took out a lot of the arrogant Amber qualities, but there's still a little bit of it in there. So when I say that, there's those Lassie influence, it's really obvious if you read the book. But the premise is that Shakespeare's Prospero never drowned his books. It's 500 years later. He's still around. He runs Prospero Inc., or he did until he retired recently, which is a company that keeps the supernatural world from attacking human beings and makes it so that oil burns in the car and storms are not too damaging and, earthquakes and volcanoes are reasonable. And he had a bunch of kids since the end of The Tempest. And one day he goes missing. The book opens the day that Miranda realizes he's missing. So Miranda has to go around and find her other siblings and convince them that their father's actually missing. And she doesn't get along with most of them anymore. So she has to travel around the magical, strange world. And I'd like to say it's set in the real world, by which I mean in our real world, there are Norse gods and Greek gods and fairies and myths and legends and Asian, mythology. And a lot of fantasy tries to pick one, but this world is set up like that, where she talks to Nibelung and then she talks to Tengu or something, and so she and her sidekick, you can see in the picture, who is an airy spirit that's been put into a body that looks like Humphrey Bogart. And he's a detective. He's the company Gumshoe.
I was going to say the guy on the cover looks like Peter Graves.
He does, because the artist found a really good Peter Graves picture.
Oh, okay.
Really good Humphrey Bogart picture. So we thought it looked good and we went with it. But it says in the book that he looks like Bogart. And then the person who made the body comes on stage at one point and she says that's what she was using. And so the two of them set out to try to find Prospero. And it's kind of hard at this point to know exactly what to say, because I don't want to give away too much, but I will say about half the book takes place in hell. So, I mean, not the first book, but of the series. So of the 3 books, it's half urban fantasy, though it was written before urban fantasy was a thing. I actually started this book in 1992. I rewrote it 7 times before Tor picked it up and published it in 2009. And they had it for a few years, and then they fired my editor over charges that eventually was found innocent on. And I got a new editor, and my new editor got into a public fight with my husband. And at that point, I pulled the books. So now they're with Kevin J. Anderson's Wordfire publishing company, which is a great small press. But when I started them, there was no such thing as urban fantasy. That came along later. So it doesn't necessarily have the tropes of urban fantasy, but it has urban fantasy in that it's a modern people trouncing, like you can see Chicago in the background there of that scene with the little, you can't quite see, but there's a unicorn in the lightning that the words are in front of there.
Oh, I can see it.
Yeah. So that's actually a scene from the book. And the funny thing was this is what I pictured as the cover. And when they asked me at Tor, what do you want on the cover? John had such good covers with Tor that I was like, oh, well, whatever you guys think is good. And they put this bloodless elf princess look on the front. I had this great review by Jonathan Molnar, who's an indie author. And he talks about what he thought the series was. And then he read it. And he describes perfectly, when he says what it thought, he describes the cover of the Tor version. And when he describes what it was like, I forget what he said, which is too bad, because it was something great like Noir Detectives meets Warhammer 40K or something. It was totally different than what you would expect. I think he was thinking of the parts when they were going through hell. But anyway, so I wrote that, so part of the book takes place with the family alive, slogging through hell, trying to rescue somebody. And part of the book takes place in the modern world, or at least the world of 20 years ago, So I was writing this book. She was supposed to have all this high fancy tech. And every time I rewrote the book, I had to update the tech because I now owned most of the things that when I first wrote it had been these crazy James Bond items, I think a starlight scope is like the only thing that I had made up that she had that I don't own now. Finally, I took out, she still has some of the gadgets, but I took out, that's the original one.
Yeah, that's a bit different.
Yeah, you see, so it wasn't really the right cover for that book. My editor really hated it. He thought that it really killed the sales for what they would have gotten if it had a better cover that matched what was in the story. That one, I mean, what is that? I described this specific, first of all, she never dressed like that. She only wore Victorian gowns. And second of all, I described this really horrific, curved, crazy sword. And this is like some ordinary sword. And third, you can't even tell that's a genie in the background.
That's a genie?
Yeah, it's just that's the scene where she picks up the sword Lemminkainen to fight the Lord of the Gin.
Lemminkainen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love that.
I love that myth.
I put it in like all the books. Anyway, I got lost where I was. Anyway, so I eventually took out all the tech in her office and just gave her a big desk, because it was just going like, the first version, she had many computers, and then we came up with multitasking. And then she had many, dot matrix printers. And then we got rid of, after a while, I just said, there's no way I can keep up with this. So then the version that's in the book, she just has this big desk and there are geese flying by. Had no tech in it at all. But there is this one scene where she uses tech gadgets. And as I said, when I wrote the scene the first time, they were only James Bond had that stuff. And now we all have it.
Although you said that she had all these different computers, and I'm sorry, I immediately flashed on Neil Breen. Are you familiar with Neil Breen?
No, I don't think I am.
That's okay.
He's an independent filmmaker. His movies are all terrible, and that's why people love them. But he has this thing where like all of his characters have multiple laptops, of which he destroys through the course of the film.
Yeah, I mean, she probably would have had that happen if she had laptops had not been invented yet when I wrote that. So she doesn't have a laptop, but she would have if I'd known about them. Because the whole point was she was supposed to show that she was rich. She's running the company when the story opens. Anyway, she's got like 9 brothers, or maybe there's 8 brothers in her. And each of them has their own subplot as she tries to figure out what's happened to them over the years, and begins to put together something that's been attacking her whole family and figuring out what it is and what her father was actually up to and whether or not he's actually evil. And it's quite, and the fun thing about that series is because I could write the whole thing over and over again before it went to be published, it's really tightly tied together from the beginning to the end. Like there's one character that if you reread the book, everything he says has a different meaning than like when you read it the first time, because he's actually saying all sorts of things that make sense if you know what he's talking about, but he sounds like he's crazy. So that was really fun to do. And I have people who've reread it a number of times and really enjoyed it. That makes me really happy. So.
And actually, that's important. It's one thing to give your audience a good story. I mean, that's hard enough as it is. But to have something that has staying power where you can read it 2, 3, 4 times. I mean,
yeah, I know someone who's read the first Rachel Griffin book 7 times.
Oh, wow.
It's just such a cool thing. And I personally don't think I think it's my weakest book. I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad book. It's just trying to start off. I had to set so much up. I don't think it's as good a book as the later books. From the 3rd book on, they're a little tighter done. There's a lot of good in it. I just reread them myself because I'm working on book 6, so I had to reread them to remember. So I didn't realize when I started all this what a stupid idea it is to write a main character who has a perfect memory.
Oh,
it's because I don't have a perfect memory, and she has to have the same opinion about a subject I mentioned in one paragraph, because she would remember what she used to think about it.
Oh no.
Okay, so that's a bit of writing advice right there already for all of you.
I would seriously consider not giving your main character that power if you have control.
If you're an aspiring writer or just starting out, when you're thinking of various abilities or powers or special abilities for your character, perfect memory, no.
Miranda was a lot easier because Miranda actually was suffering from the fact that 500 years is too long for human memory, and she would forget things or misremember them. Like at one time she realized that she was remembering the character from the Tempest play and not a real person as to what someone looked like, you see. And that was easy to write because there was, they were confused and occasionally they hid the past. And so she could be wrong about things. But Rachel's a lot harder to write. And the funny thing is that I was the one who made up the system where it said that if you, in the role-playing game, you have a star. If you put your star in something, you're extra good at it. So I put my star in for Rachel in scholarly pursuits, because I said I wanted her to be in Ravenclaw originally. And it just said in the game I had made up years before, if you have a star in scholarly, you have a perfect memory. So that's how Rachel got perfect memory.
Maybe it should be changed to mostly perfect.
I just say, if in the future, I warn people, learn from my mistake. So.
Okay. The other one I wanted to ask about is you've got this collection of your work.
So I have a friend who runs eSpec, which is a small press. And when she started it, she said, I really need some things to publish. Do you have any short stories? I was like, no, I don't write short stories that often. I think I have 3. And I looked and I had a whole collection's worth of short stories. So that is my short stories. And the only comment I can make about it is that a friend of mine read it about 2 years ago, and he said, you don't have info dumps. And I said,
that's good.
That's very important.
I don't usually, because of the way I write, I try to set things up and put it together. And a lot of the information I put in dialogue, so it doesn't come over like an info dump. But I was kind of flattered by him noticing that there weren't really many info dumps in my brain.
So both you and John C. Wright kind of have a thing for the Fae, right? You like getting into
I mean, I really love fairy tales and magic, fairies, fae things, and I have since I was little. I have this book that I was given by a teacher when I was in like 9th grade, 10th grade. That's the Folklore, Myths, and Legends of Britain. Was put out by Reader's Digest. It's like a huge, thick book. And it goes town by town in England with like their ghosts and their demons and their
I'll need to look for that.
Stuff. And I used to read this all the time. I read the fairy tale books, like the red one and the blue one and stuff. And there wasn't as much fantasy you could already put into stories when I was young. You could probably list on 2 hands the really well-known, the good fantasy books. So most of what I read was myths and fairy tales. Nowadays you could read fantasy books all the time. And I have friends, even only 10 years younger than me, who never had to read any of the original material because there were so many fantasy books available to read. They didn't even read the fantasy books I read. They read the next generation, But it came out for both John and I that we read a lot of the background stuff. We read the fairy tales. We read the myths of different nations. I spent one summer once reading myths from all around the world, which was a lot of fun.
But weren't you involved in an anthology called Badass Fairies?
I was. Yes, I was. I was editor for that too. In fact, the same person who put out the In the Lamplight put out the Badass Fairies. And those were, again, that was done kind of when urban fantasy was new. So we didn't market it as urban fantasy, but basically that's what it was. It was, fairy tales told from a BA point of view, and kind of tough, a lot like what is now urban fantasy. And so I helped edit that, and I think I read a story for each anthology. And I think they're out of print, but there is still a Best of Badass Fairies. And they took the best stories from the 4 anthologies. And that one's still available. You can get it. I think my story in there is about a British, during World War II, there's a young woman who's part of the not the air, what do they call it? The Royal Air Force, I guess. Anyway, there's a fight between Santa Claus and some Nazi airplane. He's got a gremlin.
I like. I would be for that. So a badass fairy in the RAF doing battle with Nazis to save Santa Claus.
Fun story. It's a fun story, and I really it was a fun thing to do those anthologies, and I haven't actually sat down and read the best of, because I just read them as we put them together. But considering that it's the best of 4 anthologies, it's probably even more fun than the originals, you know, because it's just the best stories put together in there.
So as we're coming up to the end of the hour, we got about 15 minutes. I'm going to again encourage all of you out there to ask your questions if you've got it. Anything about her books, anything about if you want writing advice, now's the time to ask. But in the meantime, I would like to ask, aside from telling authors, don't give your character a perfect memory, what other advice would you give to people out there who are trying to break in? I mean, it's a really weird time in publishing.
It really is. And, you know, so when I was a kid, I read this book, The Awful Truth About Publishing. And I really took it to heart, and I did everything you were supposed to do. You know, and it basically said you can't get into publishing if you don't know somebody. So I went to work for a publisher when I was right out of college for a month. And then I got mono, and I didn't work there any longer. But I actually worked for that same person later, and he became my editor. He's still my editor now. And everything's different now. You know, it used to be this wonderful world for writers where there was no advertising that worked at all. There was nothing you could do to sell books except for write better books. It was like the perfect situation, you know, and it's not like that at all. What's going on right now is that basically nobody knows. There are people who put out things about what you can do to sell at the moment, but a lot of the ones that were true 2 years ago are just, it's changed now. Things that were working 2 years ago don't work. Things that were working 4 years ago didn't work 2 years ago. So it's really up in the air. I'm kind of thinking what probably is still in motion, because it seems to me that Amazon does some things well and it's kind of the center now, but other things it doesn't do well. And I think sooner or later there will probably be new avenues. Like, for instance, imagine sites that really concentrate on certain genres or something like that. I don't know what the new things will be on. I'm not going to try to guess.
Do you mean sales or do you mean coverage?
I mean how to reach readers.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons we started doing these interviews.
Right.
Is we try to do this once a week.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that I mean, that I think new ways of reaching readers are going to develop. And we don't know which ones in the long run are, you know, are going to really work and which aren't. I'll answer that in a moment. Anyway, so I don't have a lot of advice. I used to have it really down to what the advice was and how to go about it. And having worked in publishing and as a writer, you know, I also edit and I also teach writing. So I kind of covered the whole thing. But right now, all I can say is, you know, choose whether you want to write because you love it or you want to write for money. If you want to write for money, the thing that you either need to get to the traditional publishers, they still bring in a lot more money, or you need to find something that truck drivers want to listen to on audiobooks, because that really sells.
I can give advice there. I've done a lot of research into this, and if you really want to make money on Amazon, dinosaurs, romance, and
right, you see what I mean? You look for the genre that's hot now and you write that.
Yeah.
Now, this guy just asked, how long does it take me to write a book? Well, I'm a mom, first thing. So I write at night. So I don't produce books at, like, you know, my friend Chris, who I mentioned, the Scottish gentleman, he can write a whole book in like 3 weeks. He writes, I mean, he puts out like a book a month. I can't do that. It takes me months and months to write a book. I've actually gotten a lot faster. So I probably will finish the book I'm working on in 6 months, and I probably could do it in a lot shorter than that if I hadn't taken a whole month off, because my daughter had, my goddaughter and her daughters come for Christmas. So kind of like,
hey, that's important though.
Yeah,
it was great. Okay, it was a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. I was there when the 5-year-old was born. It was the most wonderful thing, but I wasn't writing. So it takes me a while. I'm not super quick. I'm not good at things like picking a genre. It's like I listen to the Divine Muse and I write down what comes to me, and I'm scribe under orders. So I'm not really shifting to be where the money is. So that's why I say you have to decide, you know. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with writing what's selling, and if I thought I could do it, I probably would. But you know, you kind of have to decide. And if you want to write what's selling, look for what's selling, and you can make money. There's a lot of people there making, you know, nice money, and that's great. Otherwise, you just do the best you do and you try to get it out there and hope sooner or later that, you know, you get to a level. And as I say, we had it all worked out exactly what to do. And where John and I both got, you know, we had a lot of friends who never got picked up by traditional publishers. We both got picked up by Tor. We really worked hard for about 15 years and got, you know, as I said, I had to rewrite my book 7 times before my editor would buy it. So we, you know, I really put it, and then the whole world changed, you know? So I'm like, well, I just keep working, you know, I'm not going to give up, but I have a lot less advice than I used to. I do have some writing advice that I'm one of the few people who gives this advice. Like in this position looks so weird. Sorry about that. And that is, be really careful about outlines. I've seen more people stop writing and never finish a book they really liked that I thought was good because they wrote an outline than any other thing. And that is because some people can sit down and write an outline and they write a book and they do a great job, and that's wonderful. And other people, the creative process is what's making them write. It's the actual act of figuring the story out that makes it fun. And when they staple it into position, they stop. Their creativity turns off. This happened to me with my first book, and after a 3-year break, I tore up the outline and started again. That's how I found out. But because I made it through, and I've seen other friends just stop, it's a warning I give out to writers. You know, if you can outline, great. If you stop, tear up the outline and go back to wherever it was you really were excited about, and just put in new creativity and go in a slightly different direction and see if you can pick it up again. That's my writing advice.
That's really good advice.
Well, I also have a writing course. So when I was working for Superversive Press, we were doing the art and craft writing course. And we did a crowdfunder and raised money for videos for this writing course that's based on the writing course I gave, which based on the when I was learning to write, I would write down writing tips. And then for a while, I was doing a blog where I do Wright's Writing Corner. John and I were doing, I wrote an article for each of these writing tips. And then because the writing tips were popular when I shared them with other writers, I taught classes based on them. So the last video was finished within this month, but the publisher that was behind it has folded. So we're trying to figure out what to do with them. There's a book that goes with them. I put it on Amazon briefly. I pulled it down because my editor, who's also an agent, is trying to see if he can sell it someplace. But it's a fun writing course that deals with it's based partially on my own experience and partially on the advice. When I started editing, I realized after a little while I was giving everyone the same advice. And then I took the advice when I got to my 4th Rachel Griffin book, and I applied it. And I had to cut the book randomly in half because it was too long. So I applied it, and I got comments like, "This is your most focused book yet." So I realized that, it worked. So the writing book covers all this stuff, and it's fun. And there's these series of videos that explain it. And sooner or later, it's going to be available. Right now, all I'm doing is I have this low-key class I give for people who want to write a novel. It's inexpensive, and they're supposed to send something every week. I'll probably start up again in March. We did it last fall. But anyway, it's a fun thing, and I enjoy, sharing it with people, and I've been happy that people have really enjoyed it. I've been really happy to see certain books that were started and then they went through the course and the book really improved. That's always really makes you feel good as a writing teacher.
That's great. Dominic asked, how long does it take you to finish a novel? And do you have any favorite children's stories? So 2 questions.
I think you already answered that one.
First one. But the second one, I guess it depends on what you mean by children's stories. I think Lloyd Alexander's Prydain books are among my absolute favorites. They might be slightly older than what you meant. I really love and Alan Gardner's Wierstone Brisingamen, Moon of Gomerath. and Kingdom of Carbonell and Carbonell King of Cats, I think the first one is, by Barbara Slay, are among the children's books that I absolutely love. In fact, one of the highlights of my life is I read Carbonell to my son, because at one period of time he had a really late start to his school, and we just sat there on the porch in the morning waiting for the bus and read the book. And it's just such a charming book. It's a British girl and a magic cat, and a lot of the names in it are names you see in Harry Potter too. So I suspect that this book, which written in the 50s, may have been one that Rowling liked also when she was young. But anyway, it's about a girl who comes upon this cat who's owned by a witch, and the cat is actually the king of cats, and it's just really, really charming.
Cool. And Retneck says, most writers I've met who work on shorter episode-based stories who plan their stories with the concept and the ending in mind. What are approaches to long storytelling?
It's kind of the same. I know what the ending of the 20 to 24 book Rachel Griffin run is going to be. I think about the ending all the time because I work back from the ending to making sure I'm covering everything in the series. I like what Terry Pratchett said about writing, where he says there's mountains and then you go into the mist to find out what's between the mountains. The mountains are the parts you already know. And it again reflects what I was saying about outlines, which is you're leaving something open for your imagination, but you know parts of it. And I think that's the same for a short story or for something long. In what I'm writing now, I have lots of scenes that were played by email. So I have the dialogue. I should say, John and Mark Whipple wrote some of the dialogue in the books. One reason I think that men like them is that the boys are really boyish. Almost all, you asked me what's different about mine? The boys are boyish. Almost all YA books, the boys are girlish. They're like men. Okay. That's not the case in this series. There are quite a few really, really boyish boys. And, you know, when I have to write dialogue for them, I try to copy the way they did it so that mine also has, you know, either Ziggy is ziggified or Vladimir von Dredd is impressively imposing or whatever it is. But so in the original plan I made for my son, I had to fill Hogwarts. So I threw in all the characters I liked, like, you know, people like Ged, Sparrowhawk, or Kiki, you know, witches and wizards from stories. So when my friend Mark did his version of the game, he threw all in the characters he liked, including comic book characters. So when I write the book, I have to take all these copyright characters and I have to not only write a book, I have to invent the whole world they came from, because in his version, all these people had been brought to Earth from worlds, many of which had been destroyed. And so it's been really interesting experience trying to make up, you know, in his version, the head of Slytherin was 18-year-old Dr. Doom. He's one of the major characters in the story. So I had to make up my own version of Dr. Doom, and that was a lot of fun. So, but he is not girly. So that's one of the differences. I think that's why, maybe one reason why a lot of guys like the book is that the guys are guyish.
Very cool. Well, we've come to the top of the hour.
Yes.
What would you like to promote, and what would you suggest people check out?
Well, the first Rachel Griffin book is free on Amazon or on Kobo. So it's too bad. You know, I suddenly realized I had a promotion I'm in. I could have given you guys to promote, but I don't know where it is at the moment. But anyway, it's free. So, you know, it's a good place to start because you can try it. If you don't like it, you haven't lost very much. I encourage people to try the Fantastic Schools books because it's a great opportunity to try a whole bunch of writers at once. Many of them also have, I have this excellent narrator. The first one is a little bit rocky, but the rest of the audiobooks are really good. And I didn't realize that there was a big downside to having a really international group because there's 6 million and 2 accents in my books. And my poor narrator has to learn each one. But she really does a great job of trying to give accents to the many characters with their crazy origins.
You know, when reading on the air, if we hit an accent that we can't do, just to make sure that we're politically sensitive, we have Kat do it as Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
And I have made up ones too, because the other player in the game played the Princess of Magical Australia. Magical Australia accent's different from a regular Australia accent. So anyway, the audiobooks are fun. You know, I go out and buy them, because then my lovely narrator gets some of the money too, and she did the whole thing just because she loves the series. So, you know, I really like it when she gets paid.
And links are in the description to everything: her website,
yes.
Her Amazon site, all that.
And you probably said it, but I don't recall. Can people find where your classes are on your website?
I don't really have anything going at the moment. I do have an art and craft of writing Facebook group. Anybody's, you know, can apply to join, and I'll let you in. The classes, basically, they're in limbo at the moment. God willing, they will have a place by next year, but we don't really. The videos aren't available yet. The book is currently being chopped around, and I'm only teaching the novel writing class at the moment. Probably next year I'll do something, maybe in the fall, but right now there's really nothing. But they can contact me, and I'll put them on the list if they want something. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm all over the place.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This has been absolutely wonderful. We could probably, talk even longer. Do you have any books coming out? I mean, you've talked about a couple of them that are in the works. Do you have estimated times of arrival for any of them?
I'm working on book 6, and it will be a while, because when I do get it done, my editor always takes a long time. So I don't know, maybe next fall would probably be reasonable. I have some short story. I've just been asked to write a short story for an anthology called Punching Demons. I have this great a short story that has one of the characters from the Prospero books that I've started 3 times, and it would be perfect for this, and now I have to actually finish it. But mainly I'm working on book 6, which is really fun, because right now I'm in a section where Rachel is at her home, which is in Dartmoor National Park, which in America, living in a national park sounds weird, but Dartmoor National Park is like hundreds and hundreds of miles, and there's lots of towns in it. So it's really fun doing the research about the whole English experience of Dartmoor. It's a neat place. It's where Hound of Baskervilles takes place.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's fun. I really wish I could go there and visit and actually look, you know. But so that's a lot of fun. So she goes home for spring break, and I get to do that. But I'm working on that. I'm working on 2 short stories which have to do with the background, and I want to finish before I finish the book to make sure everything's lined up. And then the 5th story for the Punching Demons, which is called Who Rules the World. My 5th story is called Who Rules the World. One of the characters of Prospero books is the power behind the throne, the ambitious blind brother Cornelius.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a Cornelius short story.
Cool.
Illuminati.
Well, we would love to have you on again, either when book 6 is ready to come out, or one of your anthologies is ready to hit the shelves, real or digital or otherwise. Definitely, we'd love to have you on again.
Excellent. Well, next time something's actually coming out, I'll let you know.
Please let us know.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. Everybody in the chat, thank you so much for joining us. All the links are in the description below, and we will see you all next week. Good night.